presenting a field research which we conducted as script, which is a part of the Ministry of Education in Luxembourg, and which is also part of my master thesis, which I finished last year. So let's see what this should look like. Well, we started off with a paradox, which is always a good thing to do, I think. So we stated that looking at the theory, one could say that there is learning potential of digital games when used in schools. Then second step, looking at empirical findings on that topic, you might say that it should work. Yeah. And then looking at the practical implementation of games in schools or in class, you say, okay, there is no practical implementation, or at least not in Luxembourg, and in many other countries, I found that it's the same. So this is quite paradox. Theory is saying it should work. Empirical findings say, okay, it should work. And practical implementation, there is none. So what this field research is about, it was focusing on strengthening the empirical evidence on games in class and promoting the practical implementation. So this is what we did. Well, we looked at the models existing, then we derived from that our own IPO, input process output model. We had that empirical study, and we had the data analysis and the conclusions we draw of it. So we started off what we always do when playing a game. We watched carefully the map, and the map in this case were the theories and the models already existing on digital games at school, and we derive from these models our own parameters, which we found to be interesting and important. So we had that input process output model, which is quite simple. And then we had, for example, for the input, we looked at the characteristics of students, of teachers, and of the games used. And then second step, to go a bit further into detail, we looked at different empirical studies on the topic, and we derived from that what you see here. So we still got that variables, but now we got also the items. For example, and the characteristics of the students. We said, okay, it might be gender that matters. It might be age of the student that matters. It might be their digital gaming experience, which could have an influence, or interest in the topic, or their overall school performance level. And you see, we came up with our own model, which we derived from the theory and the empirical findings. And well, we really focused, like teachers always do, on the learning outcome, on the perceived impact, on the acceptance by students and teachers. That was our output we achieved or we looked at. So then we took a deeper dive into the map, and we started our empirical study. And as you can see here, we really had 13 projects in class with digital games. And well, in different subjects, as you can see, we used different games and also different type of games. So there were serious games, there were commercial off-the-shelf games, there were gamifications and game creation tools like Bloxels. And also the social form in class was different. So we had partner work, individual work, or group work. And the duration of the teaching units was also varying from 1 hour to 7 hours. So it was quite a big variety of projects. And we had an overall of 135 students which took part in that field research. And when preparing our colleagues to really have the digital games in their class, we applied the model of our colleague Tom Hilchen, which you can see here, and he parts from the idea that digital game-based learning doesn't necessarily mean that you have to play in your class, but you can also show and watch different scenes or a whole play. You can ask and listen, which means you don't play at all, but you ask and listen to your students when talking about games. We have that aspect of game creation, and we have the aspect of reflecting on games or on gaming behavior. So just two short showcases, which were realized in that empirical study. So we had a colleague who was busy in social studies at primary school, as you can see in the pictures, and he was using Minecraft to see whether students would behave in a social way or not. So it was kind of social experimentation. He divided the class into different groups, and the only advice was, okay, you have to build a house. So quite simple. And in the background, he was thinking, okay, I will see if they really build a house, or are they going to team up and build a village? How will they deal with that simple task? And what we saw is that students really teamed up, and they quickly decided to build a village, and then even had the tasks divided between the different groups. So there was one group collecting wood for everybody and stuff like that. So they came to the point when they said, okay, why did you do so? And did you get, were there rules established in that spontaneously created village people life? So it was quite interesting. That was one project, and another project which was more on the show theme was digital games as an aspect or a starting point for writing activities. So you see here Ori and the Black Forest. And we had a colleague who said, okay, we're only watching small scenes out of the game, and then you have to describe what you see with the corresponding verbs and adjectives. And you can imagine how this will go on. And you can write a story on that. So this is really story writing with a starting point in digital games. So this only just two showcases to show you what the different projects with games in class looked like. After the study, there was the evaluation and data analysis. We had three kinds of data, if you want to. We had questionnaires for students. So we surveyed before and after the games. We had used the Triple E framework for getting the teacher's point of view. So we wanted to know if they see in their opinion if there's an adaptation of learning objectives, didactic setting, and technology. That means the games used. And we had quite a lot of qualitative data, which was collected by the means of semi-structured interviews and open answers by the students, as well as class observation. So let's see what the results were. So how do students assess the effects of digital game-based learning? On the right hand, you can see, okay, on the different results. And to sum it up, is that students really felt that games were promoting their motivation and understanding of the topic, which was quite interesting and a bit deceiving for us. It was that only 65% of the students reported a learning effect. Well, we thought about that for a long time, you can imagine, and we stated, and we talked also to the students, and we stated that the learning effect wasn't quite clear to them. On the one hand, it's difficult to say, okay, I really learned this and that. And on the other hand, we had students that felt like I learned something in the game to play the game better. So this was their learning effect, which was not the learning effect we intended. So there was quite maybe a misunderstanding on the term of learning effect. And which was not surprisingly that more than 80% would like to repeat this experience to see digital games in their class again. Looking at the teacher's point of view, we see we have learned used the Triple E framework, which I mentioned, and you can see the 9 different items asked. And to sum it up, teachers thought that digital games were promoting time on task and active social learning in their class. And they saw weaknesses in evaluation, which always took part outside the game. So there was no colleague using games to really assess the students' performance. And they overall saw a strong relationship between the learning objectives, the didactic setting they have set in place, and the digital games used. And they all said, okay, we would like to see that repeated and to use games in our class. This looks quite frightening, but no worries. I'll talk you through that. I had 13 questions which I posed if there was a link between gender, between the different items and the learning outcomes. And what we found is the following, that there was an influence of the age of students. We had the greatest learning effect with the 9 to 12-year-olds, but the greatest desire for repetition in the 16 to 19-year-olds. So we talked also to the students, and we found as an explanation that the 16 to 19-year-olds really said, okay, we've seen it all in school, and we were quite happy to have that different approach, and we like to see that repeated. Secondly, what we found is that the interest in the topic is quite important for the learning outcomes, which is generally true. Yeah. So this was not quite a surprise. Then we found that there is a link between the type of the game and the learning outcomes. So what we found was really that serious games showed the greatest learning greatest effects on motivation, understanding of topics, and participation in class. Whereas on the commercial off-the-shelf games were seen as to be more thought-provoking. Then a fourth very important characteristic was the play time. As you have seen before, there was really playing between 1 hour and 7 hours in the different projects. And we found that there were low effects with short playing times. Short playing times meaning that was between 30 minutes and an hour. And it seemed to be important to have a reasonable time frame depending clearly on your learning objective, on the game use, and on your student group. And which was also not surprising, but still, that the creation of references from game to reality, that was really an important factor with big impact on the learning effects on motivation and classroom participation. And we found that the creation of references to reality was even more important than just discussing the experience during the play. So it was really not only asking, okay, how did you feel when playing the game? It was really some bit more going into detail. Okay, when compared your behavior in game to the real world, what can we talk about? What can you think about? What can we learn? So this were really the 5 things, the 5 characteristics, which we found to be very important concerning learning outcome. So let's come to the conclusions. What we can draw out of this is that digital games, due to our findings, have an impact on students and teachers. They can promote motivation, understanding, and time on task. They're considered to be as a social and active experience, and we had most students and teachers who would like to repeat the experience gained in these projects. Still, we found that learning outcomes from digital games are complex and not easy to assess. And we found, as I presented just before, that there are several parameters really proven to be relevant concerning learning outcomes. That means type of the game, age of the students, playtime, overall interest in the topic, and the transfer from the digital to the real world. So coming back to my initial questions, games at class, does it really work? For the moment, I would say for Luxembourg, no, it's not working because it's not implemented. So we came up with some practical advices or something we would like to see in our ministry and which we're working on. That means we're working on teacher training and networking on games in combination with didactic scenarios. We want to inform the curriculum responsible persons to really sensibilize them for the topic. And which you find quite interesting approach right now in Luxembourg is that you can easily link digital games to current teaching topics like, I don't know, coding, cybersecurity, politics. So it's just a small step from the normal teaching topics to using games. So thanks a lot for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions, comments, objections, whatever. And yeah, let's keep in touch to compare results and findings or to set up something completely new. Let's see.